Now that's a bass worth bragging about. Today, Kevin Van Dam will discuss a hot new technique that's sweeping across bass country. What you need to know about the shaky head and catching big bass. Also, Rick Clunn will explain the importance in different spinnerbait blade designs and how their vibrations can affect a bass's mood. But Edwin Evers is up first with a look at how to effectively fish brush piles.
What I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna fish brush piles. It's late summer, the water's low, you know, the water's not in the willow trees. We're gonna look for brush piles. We're gonna catch some Oklahoma bass. There's one. Oh yeah. Oh. He thinks he's a big one anyway. Come here, girl. That fish has got a big old head on it. I hooked him good with that. Pretty fish. It's a good 15-inch fish right there. Something really important when you're fishing these brush piles, oh, there's another one, is to make multiple casts. That was about my 5th or 6th cast in there on the same spot, and then I just aggravated that fish enough to come out and clobber that spinnerbait. Come here, girl. Man, that's a nice one too. Eating that spinnerbait this morning, man. You know, a lot of times those fish, they've seen a lot of baits come through there, and a lot of guys will just cast 1 or 2 times on a piece of cover. And it, you know, they've gotten accustomed to that. They're conditioned to that. So if you can go ahead and take it one step further and cast 5, 6, 7, sometimes, you know, a lot of logs, I'll cast 20 times in a row on the same log, and you aggravate that fish into biting. Well, there's a good one right there, guys. Yeah, buddy. That fish is full of fight. Come here, girl. Come here. All right, looky there. It's a pretty fish. Look how wide it is right there. Healthy, healthy. I just picked up my crankbait, and I'm gonna make multiple casts with my crankbait. And I think it's very important to give those fish something else to look at. You know, I caught everything that's gonna eat a spinnerbait. Now I'm gonna see if I can catch one off a crankbait. Right there's a brush pile, right there. And I know right there at that brush pile, I threw my marker buoy out, I can stop, turn around, and pinpoint that brush pile and make the exact cast I need to make. Oh, I got a pretty decent one right there. That fish was running right at me and I didn't realize I had a very good one. Just another chunky Oklahoma bass right there, trying to eat a shad. You know, a reason that I switched from that spinnerbait to the crankbait is that I'm able to cover that deeper zone a little faster, a little more effective. A spinnerbait's a great bait, don't get me wrong, you know, in deeper zones, but I have to fish it slower. Right now I'm still trying to search for these bass since I've lost them since this morning, so I'm wanting to fish a little faster, and this crankbait's enabling me to do that. You know, I went for 2 or 3 hours on that spinnerbait without getting a bite. You know, the sun's popped out. I've moved out a little bit deeper. I started cranking, and I'm starting to get bit again. So we're gonna continue doing this deeper cranking, you know, cranking these brush piles with the sun out and see what happens. You know, one of the things I'm doing, I'm hitting this brush pile from a bunch of different angles. You know, I've basically gone all the way around this brush pile. I'm bringing my bait against the wind, with the wind. You know, I'm just hitting it from a lot of different angles. All right.
Up next, Kevin Van Dam talks about a hot new technique that involves jig heads and soft plastics, people refer to as the shaky head. If you're unsure as what you will need to make this technique successful, watch as Kevin explains all in depth.
There it is. Right out of there.
tree. I've got one of my favorite finesse rigs tied on right now, and it's so deadly. You know, a lot of guys, you know, when the bite gets tough, they'll, you know, tie on a Carolina rig or a Texas rig or a tube or different things like that. But for me, this rig right here has become my go-to rig. What it is it's just a ball jig head, but it's a kind of specially designed one, rigged with a Strike King 3X finesse worm. And this particular worm is made of Cyberflex, and it's really stretchy and it's really soft, but the main thing is it floats like a bobber. So the jig head sits down on the bottom and the tail of that worm stands off the bottom and floats up, and because it's so soft, it has a lot of quiver and wiggle to it. It's a tremendous finesse bait to fish with. I was at a tournament at Lake Louisville this past year, and I caught an 11-pound, 13-ounce bass on this little rig right here on a spinning rod with 8-pound test line. You know, it was just incredible. So it catches big fish too, and you can catch numbers with it. This is one of those baits that if I've got a spot that I've caught a couple of fish off, you know, maybe it's off a point or anything like that, I'll throw this in there and catch them, you know, time after time. You know, maybe catch another 5 or 6 fish off of a spot. So it's just a deadly technique that is amazing. It's one of the hottest things going on the tournament trail. It's the #1 finesse rig or technique that's out there right now. So, oh, there's one right there. Not a real big one. That's the thing about it is you're going to catch all sizes of fish with this shaky head, we call it, or it's an Alabama rig. That's where it really originated. Was designed for spotted bass, and guys in Alabama were doing it there on the Coosa River chain. And we've really just taken it all over the country, and it's just become for me, it's my go-to technique when the fishing gets real tough, especially when I'm faced with clear water like I've got here today. You know, I mean, it's tough to get bit on reactionary baits a lot of times when the water gets real clear and it gets real sunny and bright. This is one of those things that if you throw it in front of one, they can't help but eat it. There it is. Ooh, a nice one. I just barely had gotten it down and he bit it. When the water's clear like this, you'll get a lot of strikes just on that initial fall down. The tackle that I use for this is very much like I use for other finesse techniques. I like a long spinning rod. I'm using my own signature series Bass Pro Kevin Van Dam rod right now. It's a 7-foot, it's a medium action rod. With a matching Quantum Kevin Van Dam Signature Series spinning reel, and I'm using 8-pound test XPS fluorocarbon. And fluorocarbon is one of the real keys to this technique. The thing that fluorocarbon really does is it has tremendous sensitivity to it. When I cast that out there with fluorocarbon, it's real low and stretch, so when I can really feel the bottom. I can feel the little rocks and things as I'm hopping it over cover and stuff down there. But because fluorocarbon sinks as the worm's going down, I don't have any bow in the line. That's directly right to the bait, so it really helps in hook setting. And another great thing about fluorocarbon is in clear water like this, it's really invisible to the fish. I'm going to get a lot more bites when I'm fishing with fluorocarbon because the fish can't see it. The way that I work this bait is I pretty much like to fish it on clean bottom areas. It doesn't work real good in thick weeds or anything like that. I like to fish it off a point, but I'm just going to cast it out there and let it sink to the bottom, and I put my finger on the line and then just kind of shake it along. I'm constantly just making it wiggle on the bottom. I want the jig head just kind of slowly hopping along the bottom, and you know, that tail of that worm is standing straight up when it's sitting still. You know, if I let it sit there, it's just going to kind of rise up, and if a bass gets close to it, it's going to kind of wiggle back and forth, and that's what you want. They can't handle it because it has so much action and it stays right in front of them for so long. There it is. They just can't handle that shaky rig. Just take your time with them. You know, using a good jig head with a long shank to it is critical because the way we're rigging that worm is real important. So I'm using, like I say, just a long shank jig head. I got a full length worm here, and I'll just take my scissors and I'll cut off a little bit of it, cut off 3/4 of an inch or so, and then I'm just going to rig it. Just put a little bit on there, maybe a 1/4 inch or so, and with this 3X it's really stretchy, so I've got to really force it over that barb. And now once I get it over that barb, it'll really hold it in place. A lot of people even like to super glue it. I've done that too. That'll really keep it locked up there. But with that barb on there, you can see it really wants to stay up on the head of that worm. And then I just put the hook point all the way through and then back it back in. And that makes it stand straight up off the bottom like that, and it gives it that tremendous action. So this is not a technique that's good for covering a lot of water. This is a technique that I like to use once I've got an area where I found some fish. Maybe I caught them when it was cloudy and windy or something like that on a spinnerbait, and then, you know, it gets high and bright and the conditions get tough. That's when I switch to this. You know, you shake that down there. If you get it in their house and get it close to one, he's probably going to bite it. There it is. It's one of those things that they can't handle that worm shaking down there in front of them. I catch a ton of numbers of fish with this rig, and it's really, you know, it's a really effective technique. You know, today I'm fishing a lake that's got about an 8 foot of clarity, and you know, it works great there, but you know, I fish it in dirty water too. If this is a rig that is so effective that if I know where they're at, even in real dirty water, you know, I'll throw this particular rig. All I do is I really change the color of my worm. You know, in clear water like this, I've got a green pumpkin on right now, watermelon pumpkin, watermelon red. Those are going to be real good. The water's kind of dirty, I'll go to a June bug or even a black and blue, go to a nice dark color that silhouettes a little bit better. This worm has so much action, and again, when you're shaking that jig head down on the bottom, you know, it's banging against the rocks and things like that, so it has a really tantalizing presentation to it.
There's a couple of different variations of this setup. This is the exact setup that Kevin's using. You just take the worm, put up the hook, push it right up onto the keeper, and just rig it like a Texas rig, and it holds the worm. This one has actually got a spring on the head. You just turn the worm up on the spring, it holds it in place, and then just back through, just like you were Texas rigging. And this is just a couple different variations of the term shaky head.
This rig is really good with these worms that I'm throwing. And one of the things that I think that makes the action so good is that I'm using straight-tailed worms. You know, sometimes I'll use a little smaller worm, and sometimes I'll use something a little fatter. You know, a lot of times if you're fishing spotted bass or smallmouths, things like that, the little 4-inch finesse worm is the way to go. If I'm looking for big fish, I'll use a regular full-size 5-inch zero and rig it the same way. The key is the way that jig head holds the head down and the tail comes up off the bottom. It really has tremendous amount of action. You can use ribbon tail worms and other things on it, but I think what makes this rig so successful is that straight tail kind of hanging there and floating up there, and the way that it quivers and wiggles. And it, believe it or not, just because it's straight doesn't mean it doesn't have a lot of action. So. Oh, there's a couple more with it. Good solid fish. That's a typical shaky head fish right there, you know, just a good solid keeper. A lot of days though that those are really gonna make a difference for you. One of the things that you really have to do though is you have to use the right size jig head. I wanna get good bottom contact, but I don't want one that's too heavy. So I use really, you know, from 1/8 ounce up to about 5/16 ounce with this rig in 1/16 ounce increments. So when I cast it out there, if I was throwing a 5/16 ounce up into 2 or 3 foot of water, it'd just be really heavy, and I couldn't get the good action out of the worm. So the deeper I go, the heavier the head. In shallow water, because this is not just a deep water technique, in shallow water, you know, I'll use an 1/8 ounce head, and it works really good around any type of cover. Once I've got the bass located and I can't get them to bite, this is something that I want to pull out of my tackle box. Oh yeah! Oh yeah! That's a nice one right there. That light line, you gotta play them around. I'll back reel a lot. They take a quick lunge. That's why that long medium action rod really comes in handy. Is not only does it help you cast far in that, but when you got a nice fish at the boat, it gives you a lot of control with them. So. One more jump. There's a pretty one. These little needlepoint hooks like that, I mean, it's just automatic. One of the things I do when I get a bite is I don't snap set the hook into them. I just like to reel and then pull, just like that. Instead of jerking real hard, just reel till the rod tightens up, and then give it a steady pull, and you'll have that fish hooked just about every single time. If I try to snap set it like I would with a Texas rig or something like that, I miss a lot of them and I lose a lot of fish. So, and if he's not on there, you just drop it right back down and he'll come right back and bite it again. Without a doubt, it's the #1 finesse rig or technique that's out there right now.
You know, one of the most exciting ways of fishing has been developed out on the West Coast called drop shotting. And it's really come on the tournament trail big time. Several tournaments have been won, a lot of top 5 finishes, and anybody can catch a fish doing this. You simply take a Bass Pro Shop drop shot weight, add it onto your line, come up about 2 foot, tie your little hook on there, put your worm on, let the weight hit bottom. You're simply just twitching that rod tip and letting it go down. Once you feel like the worm's to the bottom, twitch it back up. Don't move the weight. Keep the worm in one place, just working it up and down. Get out there and give it a try. I think you'll find yourself catching a lot of bass.
Up next, Rick Clunn defines spinnerbait fishing in a way sure to catch your attention. It's this week's Art of Angling.
What do you think is the most popular lure in an angler's tackle box? Some people would say it's a plastic worm. I personally believe it's a spinnerbait. I'm going to show you the most important element in selecting your spinnerbaits. Before I get into my primary considerations for selecting spinnerbaits, I want to give you a brief seminar on the lateral line of a bass. It's probably the most misunderstood or least understood sense of a bass, and yet probably its most sophisticated. The lateral line essentially runs down both sides of the fish. It allows that fish to detect water movement around it, and it's very sophisticated. It really draws a real clear mental image of not only the size of something, but the direction it's moving, even how far away it is. It allows them to operate even in bad water quality conditions, muddy water at night, even in case the fish is blind. This is a sense that anglers need to start paying more attention to when selecting their lures. Let's start with what I recollect is the very first blade I ever fished, and it's a Colorado blade. It's more of a round, somewhat tear shaped, but more round than most of the other blades. The next one looks similar. It's an Indiana blade. The next one probably that most people are familiar with is the willow leaf, and it's named that obviously because it's the shape of a willow leaf. The last one in that evolution is the long drop blade, and actually it's a cross between the willow leaf and the Indiana. It has a lot of flash, but it also has a lot of water displacement. The most important consideration in selecting blades is light penetration. In other words, how clear or how muddy is the water. If I'm fishing off color water, muddy water, maybe at night, I want more water displacement. I want to fish either Colorado, the Indiana, or the long drop. If I'm fishing clear water, especially where the bass has lived his whole life in clear water, the dominant sense is probably sight, and then I tend maybe to go more towards your willow leaf, more of the flash type bait than the water displacement type bait. Some of these blades are replicas. For example, the Indiana here, when I won the Classic in 1976, I caught a 715, a 6.4, a 6.3, and a 4.8 within 10 minutes on that big Indiana blade. When I won the Bull Shoals BASS tournament in 1988, the 7-pounder who won the tournament, or one of the fish that won the tournament, I caught on the Colorado blade. And then again, the willow leaf at the 2006, I caught the second biggest bass ever caught in the Bassmaster Classic on the long drop blade. You got to remember a bass is a predator. Laws of conservation of energy, it want to eat something big. Even though a spinnerbait's not that big, water displacement gives it the illusion of being bigger. And thus it will, in my opinion, attract larger fish.